program. For anybody to see, there should still be lots of copies out front. But just a very brief introduction. We have Dr. Lawrence Davidson, who is a history professor here, who specializes in Middle Eastern history and scientific and European intellectual history. We have Nick Hiller, who is an anarchist activist and a senior student here for the Women and Studies program and African American Studies program. And then we have Juliette Honsinger, who is a recent graduate from Chester University and is now a graduate student at Temple University. So we give them a nice welcome round of applause. This session will be entirely devoted to audience questions. So we'll have our friend Micah here. We'll go around with a wireless mic, and if someone has a question, raise your hand. Michael will come over to you with the speaker, hand it to you. Please keep questioning. Make sure the questions, not comments, please. Make it concise. And after about 5 minutes, after your question, we'll leave about 5 minutes for the panel to discuss it. After which I will bang the gavel. If they wish to discuss it, they may. But I'd probably advise that they start winding it down so we can get to the next question, so we can answer a whole host of inquiries. So to open up this panel, do we have any questions to start it off?
Just a quick question. Earlier, talk about the socialistic society. What about, okay, say for instance, what is your opinion on Ron Paul's idea of just removing the whole thing altogether? Yeah, free trade, removing from it, pretty much trying to get those industries back into the country.
Could somebody repeat his question? The mic keeps cutting in and out.
My question was, Ron Paul, which he's probably known as the father of the Tea Party movement, but he suggests that he's a strong believer in removing the from free trade, basically international free trade, getting out of that department and trying to get these industries back into the country. That's basically commented about the Walmart comment.
Well, I have to admit that I'm not an economist, but I think historically, free trade has hurt small businesses, small indigenous crafts, industries, and essentially local production, right? So essentially, what happens is that you open your borders to the cheapest possible competitor, to the competitor who can produce cheaper, and in comes all kinds of goods that then displace local production if local production can't compete. I'll give you an example of this. For instance, in the 18th century, there was a cotton cloth production in India, right? And so there were literally tens of thousands of people who were involved in the production hand production of cotton cloth in India. The British came in, took control of India, and opened the India's borders to machine-produced cotton. That was just beginning in terms of the Industrial Revolution. But what happened was that within a couple of years, you had tens of thousands of unemployed Indians. All right? Now, retrospectively, you can argue, well, that's progress. That's progress because you're moving from hand production to machine production, which essentially makes cotton cloth cheaper and more people can have it. The problem is that you're doing it in such a way as to destroy the livelihood of thousands and thousands and thousands of people. So the deal here is to find some way of allowing for progress that or essentially you train them for new positions, new crafts, new jobs that satisfies their economic needs. It's not an easy process, but the way the capitalist system does it is by totally disregarding the fate of these people. That's what free trade does. So until we can manage this so as to not destroy the livelihoods of all these people, I agree, there should not be free trade.
I have a question about your question, actually. I'm not all that familiar with Ron Paul and his stances on it. Do you mean that he suggests that we drop out of free trade and become an isolationist as far as markets go, or that the system remains in place? Is that what?
Ron Paul's he's a constitutionalist. He's the same guy who's voted against the Patriot Act. So I mean, you're talking about a guy that's full to the Constitution. He's by word, by letter, every letter, word, whatever. The one thing I was saying is that Ron, like overseas, all these regulations. I mean, they don't have regulations in there. They got children, sweatshops and everything else. How can we compete with that? And yet, we're talking about socialistic society. Well, that needs to be taken care of first before you start bringing up socialistic society, because of the fact that you got so many countries overseas that are making such a profit off the United States. It's time to start producing and stop consuming. Okay, stop buying stuff and start producing in your own country. That's my reason.
I think that might be a little bit of a misstatement. I'm not so sure that poor nations benefit so much from these policies as much as we benefit from them. As far as the United States dropping out of the world markets, I think that's perhaps not such a realistic expectation. That would involve doing things like shutting down the internet. There would be no way to stop global trade. I also think that it's quite a misstatement to say that nations with, industries like sweatshops benefit from the United States as much as we benefit from them.
The corporations benefit, right? Certainly the children don't benefit, nor their parents. But we benefit in that the price for, the television or what have you that's imported is kept in some ways artificially low because we don't charge a tariff. Our people can compete because we don't charge a tariff. And the way they're producing their TV is often, or your Nike shoes or something like that, is often through child labor and the sort of production process that we've spent so many of our years trying to regulate out of the system. Right. Also, when you have exploitation like that of poor people or children or what have you essentially you're just this side of slave labor. Okay? And if you use that quasi-slave labor, there's no incentive to industrialize, to produce machines, to produce by machines, and then use your human labor for something much more productive and much more humane. So it really does hold things back to rely on that sort of labor. And as long as we feed it, as long as we're willing to accept those products and buy them, then we're essentially working that process.
That makes sense.
There's mud.
Do we have another question from the audience?
When we talk about changing from management control of society to worker-controlled industry, what major differences would we see in their management style or changes in the market when we make that shift?
I guess people would make what they want and would work how they want. Barrett said a really awesome talking about music. You know, folks make music to make music. You know, folks don't work at Walmart to work at Walmart. Like, you know, I mean, what's worker control of Walmart? Burning down the Walmart. You know, there's no need. There's no need for that. You know, our economy is based on things that don't benefit us. So yeah.
Can I ask a question of you? Is your question that how will the management style change, or how will industry change? What can you kind of narrow down what your question is?
Sure, I'll try to clarify. When workers take control of the factories, how do we get some products like, I don't assume anyone's going to want to make iPods all day. How does the market get people to do what they don't want to, while without economic incentive for it?
I would suppose personally that is the big question. I'm not so sure that, as far as history goes, we've seen all the many examples of what a worker-controlled factory looks like. What I would suppose is that the system would change. If workers controlled things like a Walmart, it would not resemble a Walmart. So when people have control of what they want to make, I don't see how things like factories and Walmarts would exist. The workers taking control of what they want to do and what they want to produce would drastically change what we see. And so I think that is kind of the open question.
Actually, I've seen this in Venezuela and Cuba, places like that. It hasn't happened on a, you know, where I've seen it. You're not dealing with large corporations where all of a sudden, you know, the secretaries kind of take over. But I've seen it in relatively small factories producing goods like shoes. And what happens there is that you get a workers' council, and the council sort of sets kinds of production goals. You do have to have some knowledge of your market, right? So if you're going to produce shoes, you have to kind of go out and get contracts for the shoes, and you have to find out what kind of shoes people want. So you start to kind of diversify. You have this workers' council, then you have people who are assigned to different things, like to investigate the market and to do the scheduling and this sort of stuff. And then what you try to do is you start to cross-train so that no one person gets stuck with the boring job all the time. You start to rotate so everyone can do approximately all the steps to the production of food. I mean, to the production of shoes, including sort of management kinds of functions. However, there are some specializations. You need to get an accountant and that sort of thing. You need maintenance people who understand the machines and electricians and stuff like that. So you are going to get a diversification of specialties. But basically, it's this council concept, which is participatory and democratic, but yet focused and realistic in terms of the needs. I mean, you don't have anarchy. Okay? At least that's the way I've seen it operate.
Do we have another question?
So I'm wondering how we would get to that point without anarchy. Because what I'm thinking is the people that do the least amount of work, that have the least ideas, are the people with the most money, and they're essentially the Ron Pauls with the most invested in maintaining a capitalist, free trade, free market system.
Right. I mean, how you're gonna? I don't know how you would transform a country like the United States with 300 plus million people, and essentially a very, very strong ideological commitment to a capitalist system, whether it hurts them or not, right? We are still a country that is committed. We are trained and educated to be devoted to that system, and I have no idea how you, short of another meteor striking, I don't know how you do it.
I guess the reason I'm asking is because there's all this rhetoric in the press right now about the Obama administration or the Occupy Wall Street folks creating a class war. And we all know it's rebel rousing and just rhetoric, but at the same time, I wonder if we can get around that.
Well, I don't think that we can build anarchism. Like, I think that that's kind of a misnomer. That's what separates anarchists from the socialists. Is that we don't, like, build anything as much as we want to create space for things to happen, to create possibilities. You know, we want to create the possibility of a workers' council as much as we want to create the possibility of a party, as much as we want to create the possibility of new social relationships. You know, we don't want to, you know, we don't have a 10-point platform that's going to say we're going to enact full employment, we're not going to enact, you know, healthcare for all. We're going to create possibilities that
All right, do we have another question out here? Front here.
My question is for the middle person. You self-identify as an anarchist. This is basically asked out of my own ignorance. So we know the capitalist story of what they want, the free market, infinitely expanding, the whole rising tide lifts all boats mentality. The socialist story of kind of the end times utopia of everybody gets according to their need and everything. What's the anarchist story? What's the end goal? What's the ideology, basically? The same as the socialist.
Yes. The difference is how to get to it.
Well, I mean, like I said before, I'm not trying to build anarchy. I'm not trying to build anarchism in this sense that I'm trying to, you know, I mean, and I speak for myself and every anarchist, you know, that's what's so crazy about anarchism, that, you know, we don't disagree on anything. But my idea is like the end result isn't necessarily definable. Like, I'm not trying to define the end result. I think Marx gets it wrong where you can tell the workers what they want. You know, I'm not trying to tell anyone what they want. We're trying to create spaces for people to figure out what they want and how to get that. Like I always say that anarchism is more of a tendency within us to destroy hierarchy and to find freedom. And I don't think that we're ever going to. I don't like using the word revolution in that way, because revolution means that there's a beginning, middle, and end. And I don't think that there is going to be an end as much as it's a prolonged struggle for freedom. Does that make sense? Yeah.
We have a question here, and also one in the back afterwards.
Okay. For both, all. I'm actually referring to more of the socialist part of it. The first part of the statement, from each according to their ability, and based on what you just said a second ago about having space to know what you want, how in our education and in our early stages of development can we foster someone to, find out what their ability is in order for them to pursue that and move on to that? I mean, like, how would one in the socialist view, how would a person find out what their ability is?
Well, I guess you know, this is off the top of my head. You have a more open kind of educational approach to things. You don't track, yet you allow folks to follow their interests, right? And you allow people to follow your interests without having of course this is utopian, without having a culturally predetermined direction. Right now we have a culturally predetermined values system attached to our education. You know, if you want to be a baker or a candlestick maker, that's a lower kind of considered culturally lower standard than if you want to be an accountant or if you want to be a brain surgeon or something like that. So, but if you can have an educational system that doesn't prejudge these things, let people follow their own interests, that ought to help. Okay, that ought to help. Now, to a certain extent, you have to reach a stage where people have to accommodate the community. I'm not saying the market here so much as the community. So, you know, it's going to be a real problem if 90% or even 50% of the people want to be bakers. Because the community is not going to need 50% of its population being bakers. So at a certain stage, what you have to teach is not that you just follow your heart, but you follow a sort of you get a sense of satisfaction. You can learn this. You get a sense of satisfaction in not only following your interest, but also accommodating what the community needs. So maybe you need to be two things. You need to be a baker for your family, and something else for the community, depending upon how it's arranged. This is very, very difficult to do in large cities. I mean, in other words, to the extent that the population grows, it's harder to do this sort of thing. Because for very large populations, you need more control. Right? It's easier to do it with small populations. But you can't do it at all unless you change the culture. Because right now, I mean, for instance, if we just took a whole bunch of students from Westchester, plopped them down in some utopian community, and said, follow your interests, but let's consider the needs of the community or something like that. I mean, they'd be fighting and be killing each other in 6 months. And it's been tried, actually, in these kind of utopian societies have been tried in the past without any thought to change, to retraining the mind to these types of priorities.
So these are learned things?
Yeah, and the question is how do you go from one culture where people have learned one set of values to a different culture where they learn a different set of values? How do you do that without being Stalin? I mean, that's the question.
That's what I often wonder. I wonder if we can take it from where we're at right now with all these people with such socially and culturally constructed ideas about what they may want to or what they're going for. I wonder if you have to take it back down before building it back up, or if you can, if there's a transition.
Yeah, I don't know how much, I don't want to monopolize this. You can't take it down. Take it down and people starve. So I don't know.
All right, next question, Dr. James Taylor had one. Micah, if you could please.
Yeah, the closest that come to mind is sort of communism that was embraced by African Americans through the 1920s and 30s. If you take an ideology like Thomas Hobbes, that we go back to our nature, and then you also look at this aspect of power, I'm representing a minority group that actually have gotten civil liberties from the government. In your ideology about anarchism, how do you put people who are non-white in your group?
Is your question that how do anarchist communities address racism?
No, some of them even about racism, just about identity and different experiences. So I guess the two-layer parts be, okay, not necessarily how does it address racism. Well, I guess you can say how does it address racism, but then also how would you incorporate in a dynamic. Dr. Davidson just got through saying that if you take one group, you take a culture and you put them in another culture. Well, minority cultures do that daily in America. So basically, how would you it's twofold questions. How would you handle the ism of racism? Let's ask that. And then secondly, how would you, for a group that has gotten or received most of their rights through the government, how would you actually, how would you sort of propose this new ideology in regards to that? Or not new ideology, how would you propose anarchism in regards to that?
I tend to look at anarchism mostly as an ideology. I don't necessarily adhere just to that. I have my own tendencies of socialism as well as communism. The main thing that I try to press about anarchism is operating by consensus. And in that way, when you operate in that fashion, the opinions, the needs of people in a cultural group are heard and expressed. And so that is what I try to emphasize about anarchism, not so much of a strict ideology, but that operation by consensus in communities.
The one piece, I guess, so that's what I'm trying to get to, sort of the heart, and that's all I'm getting. If you go by that philosophy, however, then the white citizen councils down south, then their ideology would sort of reign supreme. That's what I'm trying to get to the heart of, for a country, in a group of people whose rights have come from a government in spite of the consensus of the majority. How does that work?
The way that I think about consensus is that in most groups that I've been a part of that are consensus-based, a motion doesn't pass unless everyone that is a part of the group agrees with the motion. And so that is how I think about consensus. I'm not sure if the common understanding is different than mine, that consensus is majority-based. All of the groups that I've been part of that are based on consensus is that all of the members in the group must agree on a motion for it to pass. And so I think that, does that answer the question?
It does, but I'm gonna, in many ways it does. I'm just going back to my mind. I know that you're a historian, that's why. I'm just going back to my mind. I'm looking at the American Civil War. Well, basically, for the most part, abolitionism wasn't a consensus. It's just so many examples in America where consensus, particularly when it deals with non-white populations, would have never worked. And so, or it didn't work. So that's part of the piece that I'm having. I mean, I get when people get together and they basically have an ideology that basically says, we're going to sort of work on this piece. It's just so many examples. American history is so complete without the use of, most definitely without the protection of the federal government, that minorities wouldn't have any rights. Because again, the consensus of the people were not for the freedom of the non-white population. I think Professor Clyburn had a question.
Just to echo Tanya's sentiments here,
The framers of our Constitution obviously were very concerned about a phenomenon we now call tyranny of the majority. They were very concerned that a majority group of some kind or a majority opinion would in some way oppress minority opinions. In a state of anarchy, how do we go about protecting the opinions of a minority population? Because as Tanya explained, in times past, minority rights have only been protected by a government of one kind or another. When I say minority, I don't necessarily mean a racial or religious minority. I mean minority opinion even. Even minority opinion is protected under our Constitution. In the state of anarchy, how do we protect minority opinions and minority beliefs from oppression of one kind or another? And on another note, how do we protect people from injustice in general if a state of anarchy prevails? I'm sorry.
I'm trying to think, there's a couple of different ways in my head that I'm trying to go about this. One way that I'm thinking about it, I read an essay by Huey P. Newton, who's far from an anarchist, but he writes a really great critique on anarchism, basically saying, like, you know, to the white anarchists, like, you know, that's really nice and all, but we don't, you know, we understand your desire for individual freedom, but we don't have collective freedom yet. So we're going to, you know, that's why we want to build up the Black Panther Party and build up our nation. And I think that's super important. Another way that I wanted to go with it is the Anarchist Project has, you know, the Anarchist Project, whatever that really means, but our focus needs to be the decolonization